Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of CK Stories from the Heart. Before I introduce our guests this afternoon, I would like to start the show with a Black History reflection of Mr. Bryan Stevenson, a man who chose proximity over privilege. Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. If someone tells a lie, they're not just a liar. If someone takes something, they're not just a thief. And if someone kills someone, they're not just a killer. Before we bring our guest into this conversation, we're going to do what we always do on CK Stories from the Heart. We're going to remember, we're going to honor, and we're going to root this moment in the lineage of those who came before and dared to do something extraordinary with their gifts. Today, we reflect on Bryan Allen Stevenson, born November 14th, 1959 in Milton, Delaware, a small rural town in Delmarva Peninsula. He grew up in a world that offered limited promise for a Black boy from a poor family in the American South. But Bryan Stevenson was not built for limitation. He earned his Bachelor's of Arts in Philosophy from Eastern University in Pennsylvania, and then did what so many ambitious young Black minds have done. He climbed to the highest academic institution in the land. He earned both his Juris Doctor and his Master of Public Policy from Harvard University, graduating in 1985. And then he did the thing that most Harvard-trained lawyers do not do. He walked away from comfort. He walked away from the lucrative career that his credentials guaranteed. He drove south to Alabama and he sat down next to the condemned. He sat down next to the poor. He'd forgotten the wrongly accused, the mentally ill, and the children who had been sentenced to die in prison for crimes committed before they were old enough to vote. He chose proximity when privilege called him elsewhere, and that choice charged the arc of American justice. In 1989, Stevenson became director of the Alabama Capital Defense Organization known as the Equal Justice Initiative, which he formally founded in 1994 in Montgomery, Alabama. The EJI has become one of the most consequential human rights organizations in the United States, having freed more than 130 wrongly condemned people from death row, but his work reaches far beyond individual exonerations. Bryan Stevenson took his arguments all the way to the United States Supreme Court and won. In Roper v. Simmons, 2005, the court ruled that the death penalty was unconstitutional for crimes committed while under the age of 18. In Graham v. Florida in 2010, the court prohibited life without parole sentences for juveniles in non-homicide cases. And in Miller v. Alabama 2012, perhaps his most sweeping victory, the court banned mandatory life without parole sentences for all juveniles under 17, a ruling that affected statutes in 29 states and retroactively altered the sentence of more than 2,300 people who had been sentenced to die in prison as children. In 2014, Stevens published his memoir, Just Mercy, a story of justice and redemption, a work that went on to become a national bestseller and a cultural landmark and a call to conscience for a generation of readers who had never before had to confront the realities of mass incarceration, racial bias in criminal sentencing, and what it means to live in a nation that has not yet reckoned with its past. In 2019, the book was adapted into a major motion picture starring Michael B. Jordan as Bryan Stevenson and Jamie Foxx as Walter McMillan, one of Stevenson's first exoneration cases, a man who had been placed on death row before he was even convicted. Stevenson also spearheaded the creation of two groundbreaking memorials in Montgomery, Alabama. The Legacy Museum, which traces the lineages from slavery to mass incarceration, and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, the first national memorial dedicated to the victims of racial terror, lynching in the United States. These are not just museums, they are acts of reckoning. They are what it looks like when a man decides that the truth of his nation's history must be told fully and without flinching. We reflect on Bryan Stevenson today because his life asked a question that this show was built to hold. What do you do with power, with your power? What do you do when your credentials, your intelligence, your training give you options, and one of those options is to go where others will not, to serve those whom the system has discarded, to use everything you know, not for personal ascent, but for collective liberation. Our guest today, Mackens Audena, is an attorney who has asked and answered that same question, not in a courtroom in Montgomery, but in the interior lives of Black men who were building businesses, holding families together, and quietly falling apart inside. Like Stevenson, he recognized that the law and the professional expertise alone are not enough. That was what people needed. What Black men in particular need is someone willing to get proximate to the pain that no credential can fix. Someone willing to say, I see what's underneath and I built something for it. We honor Bryan Stevenson. We carry his work forward. And now in that spirit, we bring in a man who is doing his part. And so let me introduce our guest today. There's a silence that Black men have perfected. It is not peaceful. It is not the silence of man who has nothing to say. It is the silence of a man who learned early and at great cost that saying the wrong thing, feeling the wrong thing, or needing the wrong thing could cost him everything. His job, his reputation, his standing in his community, his idea of himself, and so he got quiet. He got controlled. He got strong. And the world called that strength. And the world was wrong because we called strength was often survival. And survival without support, without language, without space to be human, survival without those things has a long-term cost. And we're paying it every day in our relationships, in our health, in our businesses, in our communities, in our silence. Welcome to CKStories from the Heart. I'm your host, Charles Zachary King, and this show exists because I believe, I know that the stories we have been told to keep quiet are the very stories that have the power to set us free. This is not a performance. This is not a highlight reel. This is a space where real men walk through the door and say real things about what they built, what they broke, what they survived, and what they are still trying to figure out. We hold all of it here without apology, without a filter, because the truth is not a danger. The truth is a doorway, and we walk through it together every Sunday right here. Today's episode is for every Black man who has ever been praised for his output and ignored in his humanity. It is for every woman who has watched a Black man she loves close, like a door, and had no idea how to reach him. It is for every son who was raised to be a soldier and never taught how to be a person. It is for every leader who sits at the top of something he built and feels completely alone inside of it. Because today, we're not talking about strategy. We're talking about tactics. We're talking about productivity or hustle. Today, we're going deeper. We're going into the territory that most public conversations about Black men never reach: the inner life, the emotional architecture, the question of what it actually takes to become a man who leads, loves, and lives fully, not just functionally. My guest today is an attorney, an MBA, a business consultant, a framework builder, and a thinker who has spent years sitting across from capable, high achieving Black men and seeing what was underneath. He built a framework to name it, he built a tool to measure it, and now he is here to talk about it here on Sunday afternoon with all of you. From his platform, 11 kilometers per second, and with the calm, precision, and cultural clarity of a man who has done the work himself, please join me in welcoming my guest to CK Stories from the Heart, Mackens Audena. Welcome to the show, brother.
Hello, hello, hello. Charles, Mr. King, I appreciate the opportunity to use your audience and your platform. I thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the history lesson. All of it was great and wonderful. Happy to be here.
Yes, sir. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience before we get into the show?
Um, I will let you lead. There's a lot I'd like to say to the audience, but where to start, I'll allow you to guide me.
Well, first I'd like to start here in the show. We'll get into it, and I'd like to give the audience an opportunity to learn more about you, the guest, as we get into the show. So we'll
Okay.
start with this, which is what I call your life story.
Yep.
And so before we get into the framework and your work, I want to go back to the beginning. Where do you come from? And what did the men around you teach you, spoken or unspoken, about who a Black man is supposed to be? And how did those roots shape the man sitting across from me right now?
Absolutely. So I was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, moved to Norwalk, Connecticut when I was 7 years old. And I would say that the lesson that we are taught in society, consciously or otherwise, is that a man is supposed to lead, a man is supposed to succeed, a man is supposed to dominate. And we are taught that in ways that we don't even truly understand that we're being taught. We're taught it by both women and men. And what that does a lot of times, when I realized a lot later than I'd like, and part of the reason why I do what I do, is that this creates a fear that we can't even name. The fear that we are taught to actually battle is one that we associate with physical threat. So everyone has to be courageous, not let anyone, punk you, depending on the environment that you're come from. But we are never taught about the fear of failing, the fear of how we're being perceived. And so a lot of us go around looking to manage our image, looking to manage, never looking to have failed, never looking to not be the expert. And as a result, we never get to the point where failure actually makes us become an expert. It is, in fact, falling multiple times and then getting back up to figure out the unique and the nuances around whatever it is that we intend to be an expert in or to be very adept in, that we get to be that expert. And so a lot of us fear it and we withdraw from it. And that's a lesson that I have learned and in turn trying to impart on my children and all the Black men that are that I can reach, because it's necessary for us to build our community.
Tell me about a specific moment, a defining moment, when you felt the distance between what you had accomplished on paper and what was actually happening inside of you. Because I think a lot of Black men know that feeling, the credential on the wall, the title on the door, and something underneath that doesn't match. What was that moment for you, and what did it reveal?
I mean, that moment happens every day, to be quite honest. I was watching a clip on Instagram for Will Smith talked about, fear, and how even to this day, as big of a star as he is, like walking on stage, he still feels a little bit of pressure in the moment. And so I feel the pressure here. Like you see behind me, the credentials. I have an MBA, I have a law degree. I took the bar and all of that good stuff. And even to this day, it's like, okay, well, aren't you supposed to be, practicing the law? Aren't you supposed to be a corporate lawyer? What level of success are you supposed to have? And so, in that sense, like, how do you respond to that level of pressure is what I try to teach. Does it shrink you, right? Does it make you, withdraw from the potential situation? Does it make you over explain yourself? If you are a person who is confident, you show up as you would your ideal self. And so, this is a thing that shows up every day, and it is in fact one of the things that would otherwise prevent you from reaching your potential, because you are managing, because you are responding in a way that doesn't allow you to fully be yourself and to fully take advantage of the opportunities in front of you.
So you've spent years in rooms with high achieving black men as an attorney, as a consultant, and as a peer. At what point did you start recognizing your own patterns in the men you were serving, and what did it feel like to see yourself in them?
Huh. That is a so I don't necessarily think that I saw it immediately in the men that I was serving. And I'll tell you exactly why. First, I saw it in myself. And as I saw it in myself, I also recognized that I've been around a bunch of men who were experiencing very similar things, or at least responding to what seemed like they were experiencing many different things. Part of the reason why I say, I didn't first recognize in the men that I'm serving is because there is a dearth of men in the spaces that I actually serve. So I do business consulting, and many of my clients happen to be women. And so, there is a well-known statistic that Black women are some of the fastest growing entrepreneurs. And they do that because ultimately they have to figure it out. Women are figuring it out in a world where, you know, they were told that part of what they were supposed to do is find a man who is going to provide. And in many cases, they're not finding the men who can do that. And so they had to do it for themselves. And there's a lot more dynamics here. I don't want to get into the complexity of it, but what I want to say is what I recognize is that part of the reason why a lot of the rooms that I was entering were filled with women, and I would be one of, a few men that would be there, is because I recognize that, just to give you a point about how early it started, like there were places where I would, show up where it was like youth, and I'm talking, early teens, and it would be just a bunch of girls and not boys. They would not be in those areas because it starts very early what we are told is our, range of acceptable behaviors and acceptable, practices and places where we're supposed to be. And that's one of the things that also told me, you know what, this work is needed. Like, we need to do this because ultimately we can't have a community where the only ones that are succeeding are women, are our women. We need to come together and both be strong so that we can build our community.
What was the internal shift that made you say, I need to build something specifically for the inner lives of black men? And what did it cost you to make that turn?
Yeah, I think so. It's a lot, and I would say it's still costing me because I'm in the process of building it. And whatever it is that you're in the process of building something, there is the doubt. Number one, there is a specific expectation of people. One of the things that I do in my program is talk about decision finality, making decision and sticking to it, and part of why we struggle with making decisions is because of all of the different voices that we have to manage, whether it's a voice of fear, whether it's a voice of impulse. And a lot of times it's the voice of conditioning, which is like what is expected of us from society and from the people that we love. And so in that sense, like my organization, my business consulting organization, I run it with my wife, MBA Growth Partners. And so there is an element of, my approach that, or my decision to go in this direction that wasn't necessarily in line with where she wanted to go. And so I had, there was a cost with respect to pursuing that and sticking to that decision. There is, so that's the cost, right? So, it's still costing me. I think the first part of your question was, what was the first part of your question? Let me ask that.
Okay. is what was the internal shift
Internal
that,
shift.
yes.
Okay. So I want to say the internal shift. So this is something that I've been, building both internally and I've been incorporating in my business coaching over the past several years. I want to say maybe 2018, 2017. And what happened is at the time, my wife and I, we were at a breaking point. Ultimately, there was a conflict that didn't necessarily have to do with, what I was dealing with, but what it did was it set her on a path where she was like, okay, I am going to leave this man. And as a result of that decision, she had to get her mind around what it would take for her to be on her own. And so because of that, this is ultimately what started the business consulting. She was working for a well-known consulting firm at the time. She decided ultimately to quit that and start pursuing her dreams. And it wasn't until she did that and started to confront her fears that I then realized that my issue was fear as well. And again, what I told you earlier, like the fear that we have as men ultimately is not something that I was able to put a name to. I didn't have the language for it. I didn't recognize that fear. And I know this because, prior to this, I had worked so much. I read books. I'm like trying to figure out precisely what it was that made me show up unevenly. At times I would feel powerful and at other times I wouldn't. And, I wasn't necessarily as powerful and as consistent in how I wanted to show up and how I felt as I wanted to be. And I did a lot of work trying to figure that out, but I could not put the language of fear to it. It just wasn't something that was available to me. And until she started to confront her own fears in that way. And I was like, oh, this is what it is. I'm afraid of how I'm being perceived. And so that set me on the path to trying to figure out precisely what is happening here. And one of the things that I realized is, okay, well, if women, and this is a much longer story, but if women have what I describe as having the relational skills that make us, successful in different areas of life, what is causing that? What is allowing them to learn it, whereas we are not actually engaging in that? And what I came to the conclusion of is that it is about internal stability, right? Internal stability is having that internal disruption and not withdrawing, right? It's continuing to show up. And part of the reason why it's something that women also deal with this. So let me not say that this is only exclusive to men. The difference is that the way that we are socialized is that women aren't necessarily tasked with, they're not charged with succeeding. In fact, a lot of the times they are seen as not being able to perform in certain areas that have been to throughout history, the realm of men. And so a lot of the times they don't succeed despite being doubted. They succeed because of it. They succeed because of it, because I am now given the leeway. I'm given the freedom to fail. You're not expecting me to succeed. So now I'm going to show up. And then when I don't do well, this is no different than before. I just keep on showing up. And so it mimics internal stability. They may not necessarily have internal stability, but they're not also, tasked with succeeding. And so they keep on showing up. What we need, because that pressure is put upon us by society, is to be able to say, okay, I'm feeling that pressure, but it's not going to make me withdraw. And that's what internal stability is. And that's precisely what my program intends to teach men.
So let's talk a little bit about the relational power and the skill we never taught boys.
Mhm.
When we had our discussion over the phone, this was the first part of your system that I really found to be a really great tool. What is relational power and why? Culturally, historically, and systemically, was the skill specifically withheld from Black boys?
So what it is the skill was just never taught, right? And that's the case with, there's so much now that we are learning because of technology, right? We all now have access. Every single person now has access to be able to say, here's what I have learned. Prior to that, right, you had a number of books. And then, it's not like the information wasn't there. There's nothing new under the sun. But there's two things that was different. One is that you didn't necessarily have access to all the books. You didn't know that they existed. Number two is that it wasn't necessarily personalized, right? It was generalized. And so there are a lot of things that we are now learning about ourselves that somebody could say, here's the experience that I'm having. Does that, resonate with you? And that's the beauty, I think, of, social media, that, if you're using it well, you can get access to that. But it wasn't being taught. So no one had it, right? The issue is that what happened is that because men, white men generally, at least globally, were the only ones that had access to power, the assumption was that they knew what they were doing. When in fact, what was happening, what was happening is that you had a few white men who stumbled upon it. They happened to find the thing that they were passionate about, and they succeeded. And the vast majority had no idea what was going on, and so it wasn't being taught. And what happened though is that the ones who succeeded, they were communicating. Well, I won't phrase it this way. What was being communicated to people was the noise rather than the signal. And by the noise, what I mean is that they were learning the loud things, the things that you see that Donald Trump is doing, where he's like being this aggressive person and all that. They were thinking that, because that's loud, that this is what actually resulted in success. But in fact, what was actually working is things like, being able to relate to people such that they now feel like you are their person. This is what Donald Trump does well, ultimately. When we talk about marketing and all that good stuff, the people are hearing him and saying, this is my guy. That's a relational skill. These are the things that women have honed because they could not rely on their physical strength to get power, right? So it's like now, in the Bible, they talk about the women being the neck, right? So that turns the head. You don't do that by being forceful. You have to be able to have relational skills to have those kinds of conversations. We all know men talk about this all day. Women, quote unquote, manipulate. Those are relational skills. And so the thing is that the things that we are considering more feminine, in fact, are the things that have led to men succeeding. Even if you look at organizations that are known for their violence, whether it's street gangs or the military, it's not the biggest dude who can beat up everybody that's going to lead that group. The person that leads that group is the person who can get others to follow him, the person who can get influence. That's the person that leads that group. He's now going to lead the strongest person to go into battle for him. And so when we're looking at this person being all, big and strong and beating everybody up, we don't realize that that's not the real power there. And so relational power is reframing the idea of what true power is so that people are not out here chasing the loud, but chasing the real skill that allows you to exert the power. Ultimately, if we think about power, power is actually achieving an outcome that you intended, right? So a God, for example, all powerful God, how quickly can I get from thought to fruition? So a powerful person says, I want to get this to happen. And so they are now figuring out how to do it. Yes, physical strength can in times get that done, particularly if you're trying to destroy, which is what Donald Trump is doing. It's very easy to destroy with physical and aggressive power. It's not that easy to build. Like constructive power requires cooperation. That takes relational skills. That's what happens when you are trying to do something important.
So, what is the process that you use in helping to teach this skill?
So the first step ultimately is, awareness. So again, thank you for, give me 1 second. You see my AI on my phone is, my AI on my phone is listening to everything I said now, is responding to me. The first step is awareness, right? That's one thing that can be very helpful. But what happens is a lot of times people have the insights. Insight alone is not enough to change your nervous system. It's not enough to change habits. And so what I do in terms of building internal stability is I have a program that ultimately puts you through these scenarios where you can now experience the internal disruption. So, this is a thing that I've learned that is used in multiple different areas. It's like, the military uses it, athletes use it. So for example, if you are looking to perform better, if you put yourself through the scenario mentally, it has been proven that that helps you, even if it's a physical task that you have to do. So the idea here is that life does not afford us a lot of opportunity to get these internal disruptions a lot of times. And so we don't have the opportunity to practice what happens. And so my program puts you in those moments, those pressure moments, so that you can regulate your nervous system, that you can respond in a way that's ideal. So just to bring it home, what I mean by life doesn't afford you those opportunities to practice, you have let's say you have a fight with your wife, some kind of thing that she says triggered you. And then you respond in a way that when you're calm, you're like, man, I should have done something differently. And now you know this. And now everything is good and it's beautiful. You've apologized. And you don't get to get that trigger for the next 3 months. Afterwards, you've completely forgotten what you've learned. It's not a habit yet. And so you repeat that same pattern when it happens 3 months later. And so the idea here is to put you into these situations over and over again so that you can now understand how that shows up, and then you can build a habit around it.
The power means dominance model. Where does it come from for Black men specifically? Because I don't think it came from the same place. It came from other groups for other groups. Talk to us about how that model was handed down through family systems, through street culture, through the Black church, through survival itself, and how did dominance become the only definition of a strength that many Black boys were given?
Yeah, that's a good one, because you're absolutely right that, although I think it is generally a an issue that boys face generally, I think it's global. Ultimately, I think that it evolved biologically. Again, we were the physically stronger ones. And so I do think that there are certain cultures, particularly the Black culture, where it's more prominent. You see it also in how our women, too many of our women, I don't want to paint all our women in this brush, but too many of our women, and particularly the loud ones that are on social media, have limited the range of behavior that is acceptable to men, such that anything that we do is considered quote unquote suspect, or it's, what's the word they use? In any case, they're insinuating that the men happen to be homosexual because of certain behavior that is like human behavior. Like, we can't have emotions, right? Everything is like, limited to us, so we can't be our full selves. And so part of that, a huge part of that, is the survival piece, right? Like, obviously, for African Americans particularly, or anyone who was brought here as a slave, Africans in the Americas, the white racist structure essentially like stripped us of our ability to be men. They emasculated us. They took our women. We couldn't do anything with respect to that. A lot of the time they, did whatever they want with our children. And so as a result, when we have any chance, this is why we call ourselves, the N-word, or we are, hating on each other. Whenever we have a chance to exert any kind of power, and you'll see this in any group that doesn't have power, that the thing that is most important is not, what it actually takes to build, but what it takes to not feel powerless. And so part of that is, going in and feeling like we have to dominate the other person. It gives us a sense of power, even if it's not real power, right? Anger is not real power. It's just a feeling like you haven't done anything. But, that's part of what's happening with us, right? Is that we're responding to this need for survival, and it's not, our culture at all. It's a response. And I think that's a huge part of what's going on. I think that, our women, particularly these days now, they're frustrated. They've had to hold it down for so long, and traditionally how other women are put on pedestals. They're provided for security, both financial and otherwise. We weren't able to do that a lot of times, both financially and physically. And the frustration is like causing them to say, you know what, we need we need y'all to be better, and now we're at each other's throat as opposed to recognizing the real culprit, which is the racist structure. And what we need to do is ultimately we need to invest in our men in order to get that to change.
Let's take that a little further because, as you say that, we know that there are many, many variables that go into that.
Yes.
And so just, I want you to just help contextualize this because as I say this, I want to make sure that I'm not saying this that's probably going to be like a whole cinder block and fell and hit somebody on the head.
Yeah.
But when you think about this, and as you use the context of using the women and how they're frustrated, right?
Yeah.
If the women are frustrated and understand what the system is like, why is she frustrated instead of actually unifying with that man in order to better the situation? Because you can't pin this all on him if you're both in repressive and oppressive situations.
Yeah.
And now with our men, with respect to them, because it's like, this thing about being dominant, that is just crazy talk.
Yeah.
And that's crazy talk because to me, it sounds like a part of divide and conquer, which is still seeping in Black culture today because not so many people are quick to buy in to the positivity of the Black structure that's being created in so many different spaces, such as the one that you're doing. Yep. So contextualize that for us and make that make sense for us.
Yeah, I think so. Again, this is a lot going on, but if I had to pick one or two things, I would have to say that it is ignorance, lack of awareness. Part of what I'm doing ultimately is making that known. Part of what's happening is that we have a sense of learned helplessness from the Black men to a certain degree, and I get it because we are being held down. But the fact of the matter is, there's a difference between a reason why you're down and an excuse, because ultimately you just got to figure it out. And I think a lot of women are saying, well, yeah, you're Black, I'm Black. Not only am I Black, I'm a woman. What the heck? Like, I'm figuring it out. Why aren't you? And so, and so they don't understand the dynamics that's keeping Black men from figuring it out. They don't understand that we are, in fact, running away because of how we are being socialized. And in fact, we are being raised by women. And so they're playing a big role into this. If you are saying you can't cry, you can't fail, you can't do all of this, you're contributing to it. But you have to understand that first. If you're ignorant about it, you have no idea why it's happening. And so again, part of the ignorance is the idea we have been lumped into the patriarchy that was succeeding with the white men and saying, okay, well, you have had all of these advantages. Now it's our turn to be invested into. And so you have a whole bunch of programs where they're trying to invest in Black women. You have a whole bunch of program where, they're trying to get them into STEM and fund them because they're, historically underfunded and it's needed. I'm not saying it's not needed. What is not understood is that we need just as much help. And so there needs to be an investment in us as well. And so there needs to be an investment in programs that help to push back against those societal structures. There needs to be an awareness so that our boys that are coming up now are not being limited in the same way that, our men have been, so socially, educationally and that sort of thing. I mean, and so if we get rid of the ignorance first, and we can start to invest in ways that can help us to grow together.
Well, now see, as you look at that, I want you to think about something else that you said because it makes a whole lot of sense. But I want you to think about this. As women are being funded, as you mentioned, and especially via the Small Business Administration, I want you to know that anything that's dealing with minority, the women are on the top.
Mm.
And so there's no place, and there has never been a place that says black men.
Mm.
So, in other words, from a historical context, well, I'm much older than you,
Mm.
but from the historical context, as you come to this age and this time today,
Mm.
black men are still at the bottom,
Mm.
regardless of the case. And so now that you have so many organizations and structures that are being put together that are strictly about building black men, our women are upset about that.
Mm.
Now, I want you to. Now, I'm saying this because you know that this is true, but what I'm saying is, how can you be upset about that, but you want me to be better?
Mm.
But then we are part of a whole entire system structure systematically that's meant to do one thing, and
Mm.
that is to keep the black man down.
Mm.
If the sisters that are being raised don't think that it's okay to continuously to play that part because we're trying to get there, but
Mm.
as we have raised the bar and are raising the bar, she still don't think it's good enough.
Mm.
So how does that work?
So let me just say that I don't have any evidence, or I haven't heard that the sisters are upset for programs that benefit black men particularly. But the issue for
No,
me is
not
not.
saying programs, not saying programs, not
Mhm.
saying programs. I'm saying for black men still as to be what they're saying is not there and not ready
Wait,
when
can you
there
say it again?
are organizations and structures that are in place that are helping. Black men are trying to help black men.
Yeah.
But I think even in that process where you can still raise it just a little bit
Yeah.
for what you're doing because you're on a continuum, she still is not thinking that it's good enough.
Okay, so let me rephrase what I think I'm hearing, so that you can so that we are on the same page. So you're saying that despite the fact that we are, you know, trying to help each other out, making efforts to help each other out, women are still not seeing that effort as good enough.
Exactly.
Okay. So you know, I want to say part of it obviously is the lack of awareness thing too. You know, that they're not necessarily aware that there is a need to begin with, and so there is that you know, what we're doing right now is making folks aware, hopefully whoever it is that sees this, that you know that the investment is necessary. um the second, in that it's not, we're not getting the investment. What we're doing is out of, you know, like myself, I started a program. We have a group of people who are doing these programs. It's not like we're getting funded by the state. In some cases, actually, there's something in Maryland right now that's looking into to do that. But there's a lot more that needs to be done, not just can be done, that needs to be done. And you know, I think with respect to the awareness piece, it is about the communication that things, we didn't get here overnight. It's not going to change overnight. And so, yes, I get that you're frustrated. I get that, you know, you want more. I get that, you know, I mean, this is the types of things that happen in individual relationships, and I think it's happening collectively. It's like, bro, we have been doing this so long. When do we get ours? And like, and women ultimately are raised to be princesses. They're like, we are told that while we're up there in the tower, the knight in shining armor is going to come and then offer us the world. And that's, for me, that's fine. I have a traditional view, and so the idea that they have and want that, that's completely fine by me. But and I know that you've been waiting that for forever, but it is what it is. Like, you can't wave a wand. And so if you actually do want it, we have to have still some level of patience while we build it, because we're just now finding out that, you know what, this was something that was underinvested and needs to be invested into. So now is when we could actually make the moves to get what we ultimately want in the end.
So when rational power, relational power is absent in a black man's life, what
Mhm.
does that actually cost him? Not in theory, in practice, in his marriage or his partnership. in his body, in the businesses he leads, in the way his children learn to close themselves off. What is the real price of a black man who has never been taught how to be in genuine relationship with another human being?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking at the extremes of this continuum, like you have a person who is so maladapted that they're not necessarily functional. These are the men who are ultimately, and this is something that is happening more and more. These are people who are either wards of the state, or they've fallen out of. I mean, there's like you can walk in any inner city and find a whole bunch of men out in the streets, like with a bottle in their hands. And more now, like in January 2026, women have surpassed men in the workforce for the first time in peacetime era. And so like there's tons of women of men now who are reliant on either their mothers or their girlfriends. I mean, a lot of that is structural. A lot of it is because of the economics of things. Like we no longer have manual labor, which was something that any guy of physical strength could go in and like go into the coal mine and things of that nature. That's going away. And we have a service economy where relational skills becomes important. You need to be able to communicate and have conversations with people. And so on a less extreme level, and there are gradients obviously on this continuum of people. It's how you show up, how you are raising your own kids in terms of allowing them to be more productive, how you are interacting with your wife and being able to communicate both with strength but also sometimes with compassion, being able to compromise and at the times that's needed, being willing to manage the situation, not necessarily be like, oh my God, this is too much, I can't do it, and withdrawing or getting angry as a means of stopping what feels to you like an onslaught because you can't deal with that internal pressure. There is, showing up at work and not necessarily being your full self, not responding because you're afraid of what the what the pushback would be like, and so therefore no one ever gets to really know what you're capable of, because you're so afraid that if you make a mistake then you'll never get that opportunity again. So you're not showing up as your full self and therefore not rising up in the corporate ladder. There is the not taking the risks to become an entrepreneur, for example, because you are so fearful of failing. You need, you can't take the responsibility. You can't own whatever the consequences are. And so you don't make decisions. I have clients who ultimately will give you all kinds of reasons why they haven't decided on something that's so easy to do, because that decision finality is so difficult for them to make. And so it's all of these things that are taking place when you don't have the ability to manage what's happening internally that we need to deal with in order to create strong men. It's real strong men, not the ones who are just sitting here stoic and I'm unbothered. And that's not real strength. Real strength is the ability to take a licking and keep on ticking.
I have this question here that's in the chat, which goes back to our discussion prior to this last question. The question here is, will people take the time to do the work?
I think there are a lot of men who are, we're in a position where I'm at. It's like, bro, T.I. has a song, it's called You Can Get Whatever You Like. Yeah. Which man doesn't want to be that man? You know what I'm saying? Who doesn't want to be like, yo, you can have, listen, daughter, wife, whoever, friend, I got you. Who doesn't want to be that man? The question for them is, how can I become that man? And a lot of times, the youthful, what's the word I'm going to use? The youthful dreamer, the one who felt like everything was possible, that's been beaten out of them, because of setbacks. And they think, oh man, it's not for me anymore. And society will tell you as a certain age, you should have gotten that. Oh, why are you still trying to do that? Bro, that's the pressure. And you may let that pressure dictate what you do. But the idea here is it's still possible, and we need to let them know that it is still possible. And even if you don't succeed, bro, like we think of ourselves as, warriors, but a warrior goes down fighting. And so I think what we need to do is let people know that it is possible. And 9 times out of 10, the guys will do what it takes. The guys want to do what it takes. Now, this is the case with everybody, because there is like a lot of times we're not willing to pay the cost to get what we want. We think we are. We say we are. But anybody who has ever succeeded, the cost of that is big. And I want to just speak to that, because when we're talking about like what we're building as a community and why it hasn't happened, a lot of times it's much easier for us to do the thing that is emotionally based, the thing that, if it's time to fight, Montgomery brawl, if it's time to fight, it's easier because it's emotional. And that's why it's so much more attractive. The passionate thing is so much more attractive than the thing you have to show up to every day, and do consistently, the hard things. And so I say that to say, we want to do it. Is as a human being, as human beings, are we willing to pay the cost? And that's an individual thing, but I think a lot of people will be willing to pay the cost.
Okay, well, here's a follow up to your answer to that question. When did this shift change where black men have fallen behind?
All right, Nikki. um, when did it change? I don't know, like historically, when it started to shift. Let me just say this: the numbers show that in terms of income, black men still out earn women. Part of the issue is trajectory, number one. Part of the issue is you know what it looks like in terms of what's going to be possible. So like women in college institutions far outnumber men, black and otherwise. And so it points to the possibility that, it's going to flip completely. But I think particularly like there's the reason why men still out earn women is likely, and I don't know this for sure, is likely because we're looking at averages, and there are a lot of black men who are making such a huge amount compared to women that it appears that we're still out earning. But like if you go into any city, like so I'm in the DC metro area, Washington DC. Although since Doge and this administration, a lot of black women have lost their job, but in this city, like women are out earning the men, and so there is that. And then that's causing an impact in terms of how we interact with one another. But I don't know precisely when that started to shift, but yeah, that to provide the best answer that I could with respect to that.
Let's talk a little bit about internal stability, the foundation of real influence. Internal stability is a term you use very deliberately, and I want you to unpack that for us, because black men have been told to be stable their entire lives, stable for their families, stable for their communities, stable under oppression.
Mm.
But that stability often meant suppression. So, how do you define internal stability in a way that does not just give black men a more sophisticated instruction to go back inside themselves and shut down?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. So I think the issue, let me explain it this way, because there was this man who had a post on Instagram. A friend of mine sent it to me. And what he was saying ultimately is that women do not want an emotionally intelligent man. They want somebody who is quote unquote stable, who is like, listen, I may be crazy, but I'm going to make sure that we handle everything and all that good stuff. And they don't want somebody who's going to come in and be like, here's how I'm feeling about this particular situation. And so what I realized there is that we were learning the wrong lesson. We are confusing being a whiner and a complainer with what it means to be emotionally intelligent. An emotionally intelligent person is aware both of what's happening within themselves and are astute enough to see what's going on with someone else, right? Some people are completely like blind to what's happening when someone is not feeling a certain way. And so that's an emotionally intelligent person. And so there's a difference between being able to express a frustration and giving up because you're frustrated. That is what we like. I can go to my wife, or I should be able to go to my wife and saying, bro, this situation has got me so frustrated, but I am resolved to figure it out. Or if because I am willing to go and say, here's the situation that I'm having and it's frustrating me, I can't figure it out right now. She says, what do you think about this? And because I'm internally stable, I can take that advice, and instead of reading it as me not having enough worth to figure it out on myself, I can say, oh, you know what? I'm so comfortable with who I am. I can take that advice and being like, okay, that's a great one. Let me try that. And so it's the people who are so unwilling to be vulnerable because they look at it as weakness that are going to see anything other than them succeeding as a threat. And so when you are comfortable enough with yourself, and I also tell people that, confidence is not knowing everything. Confidence is ultimately being comfortable with what you don't know. Okay. And so when that happens and you can show up, what people see a person who is like, I'm so comfortable and so confident that, them helping me doesn't diminish me. So I think that's the difference between someone who is internally stable, who can take that and be like, I'm good, I know what my worth is, and someone who is so um you know I would term as suppressing that emotion, or I would term it as weak, actually. That what they can't afford to express that. They can't afford to be seen as weak, because maybe that would break them down entirely. So I don't know if that it answered the question, but that's how I see it.
Well, I'll just say this. I mean, because I understood and I understand what you're saying, but you see, I think that when things can work in the positive direction, I think we have to take that value for what it's worth and continuously to build on that. I think what is happening is, when you mentioned the communication piece in the beginning, the communication piece is still going to be very, very important. And what it is people are not, well, I'm not going to say all people, but there are some people that don't know how to listen, but they're always hearing.
Mm.
And so if you're not listening and you don't know how to critically think, you can't communicate.
Very true.
And so, when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter if it's this woman that's got her husband that's been struggling for work,
Mm.
but he's finding things to do in order to try to help and contribute.
Mm.
She should not make that a whipping board for her.
Yeah.
Because when they changed the world, when the world started to evolve,
Mm-hmm.
and women are starting to get hooked onto reality TV like they are,
Yeah.
it's caused more and more problems in the Black household,
Yeah.
because people are trying to live that fake life
Yeah.
and not the real life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you deal in reality, then that means you get to sit in your own purpose, be your own person, and be your better person.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the problem.
Absolutely. And so I mentioned Ti earlier, and I think that part of it is that the whole idea that what the whole, you can have whatever you like, and every girl is like, oh my, yeah, I want a man who can give me whatever I like. And the truth is that there is a difference between someone who is ambitious and someone who is lacking in self-worth, such that they need for for the income to be in a certain way, right? Like, for me, an ambitious person is not necessarily chasing income, they're chasing purpose, right? And so if you have a good woman, because a lot of times you don't, there are some women who are just looking for money. And from my perspective, if I'm talking to my wife, my son rather, what I'm gonna tell him is, find a woman who sees the king in you. Now, that person is willing to support. And a lot of times the women are willing to support, if you find a good one, obviously. But then now the question for you is, are you willing to now push so you can meet your potential? And this is what I work on. But I think a lot of times women are looking, like you said, based on social media and all these standards, are looking at all of their friends and saying, here's what I deserve as well. And those are two separate things. This is, when you do that, you're doing it because you don't have a sense of your own self-worth. It should never be about how other people are looking. It should always be about your own purpose, how you want to show up in the world. We know from evidence, in any person who has made it to the levels that we're looking for, that they say the money does not bring you what you think it will. It's not going to bring you that happiness. So if
Right.
you haven't found the thing that is going to give you purpose, I promise you, you can chase that money all day long. Once you get it, you're going to be in the same position. So that's my statement with respect to that.
So tell us about internal stability index. What it actually measures, how it works, and what Black men typically discover when they go through it.
Absolutely. So I have two separate assessments now. One is a snapshot. The one that's on my website, 11 kilometers per second, is a snapshot. It kind of gives you, I've started working with AI to kind of give you a sense of how, you can have a back and forth with what may be some internal pressures, and you can have the AI respond to you in a way. And once you've taken that snapshot, it gives you a sense of how it is that you're showing up. I also have the internal stability index, which is less dynamic. So it's not, interaction with an AI. It's just like you're picking from a set of potential responses to what I've already laid out as possible pressure points. And so it's not necessarily specific to anyone. I mean, the AI is not specific to you either. The only way you get the specifics to you is if you're having the conversation with me. But what that does is, since it's self-reporting, it's limited. But what that does is, if you are able to pick out precisely how you respond, it gives you an indication of how you show up when you're under pressure. And that forms the basis of how, I can then start to help you to, reverse those learned reflexive moves. So that's what the internal stability index does. And, it's something that could be used for any, demographic group. But again, because I focus on Black men specifically, what it would do for a Black man is, set the foundation for what it is that how you have been ultimately trained unconsciously by society, so that we can start to undo that.
Well, this goes back a few questions ago. There's a comment here from Nikki. You see it on the screen. He or she agreed with you and saying that that's true. I'm not sure. I know it was a couple of questions ago, so I'm
Okay.
sorry. I'm just not putting that on the screen for you.
Nikki, I appreciate you.
Um, so there's a difference between a Black man who performs stability and a man who actually has it.
Yes,
I need you to help us see that distinction clearly, please.
absolutely. So a person who performs stability might, like, they have social skills, and so they learned how to not how to, it's kind of like a if you've ever heard of what a psychopath does, like they mimic human. you know they mimic human behavior. They've learned, they sat there and watched TV, and they're like, okay, when she does this, I'm supposed to say, oh, I'm sorry, but they never actually really feel it. And in a way, a person who is performing is like bothered on the inside by whatever it was, but they're not going to respond. And so the other person has no idea until they've been there long enough, right, that this is happening. A lot of times that person might even see it, right? Like they think they're not communicating that they're bothered, but like, a lot of our communication is nonverbal. So a lot of times it's still leaking and the person can tell. But it's about how they respond. A person who is not even trying to perform might just be like, just might respond in a very aggressive way to it. But like if you're performing, you are exhibiting all the behaviors someone who doesn't necessarily care, but then you're ruminating about that over and over. Or worse, the thing was said and now your mood has shifted. Whereas in the beginning you were feeling powerful and you might be willing to ask any kind of questions, you might be willing to behave in a way that shows you as powerful. They have said the thing and now you started to question yourself. And so as a result, now everything becomes more diminished, right? The way that you respond to things is the smaller version of the thing so that you don't continue to get pushed back against yourself. And so that's the thing that happens when you're performing as opposed to truly, feeling that sense of confidence. That is when someone says something to you and you feel it, you understand it, it's there, but it doesn't impact how you then continue to behave. It doesn't impact your actions. That, and at points, it doesn't even become an issue for you anymore, right? At some point, that's not a thing that bothers you. Something, for example, that, because all of this things is all contextual, right? What you tend to think as something that is insulting, may not be insulting to somebody else because it's just not a thing they're concerned about. And so it could get to that point for you as well, where it's like, okay, so you're calling me short. All right, whatever, or whatever the thing might be. And it's like, okay, moving on. And so therefore you continue to move forward. And so the first step is recognizing it. The second step is not allowing it to impact how you behave, and to the point where it's like you are so comfortable with yourself that it doesn't actually even really matter.
Now, I mean, just kind of quickly, because I mean, I mean, that in itself puts one thing in my mind.
Yeah.
That means that you're looking at either a man that is not able to
Mm.
deal with reality, or a man that simply is just all over the place because he don't know how to organize not just his thoughts, his feelings, his emotions, and his everyday being, because it could be from the stresses and pressures from society as to what they're saying they're expecting from him or what he should be doing.
Yeah.
When we know that that is not the case, because we're not a one size fit all.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, the measurables I think are really wonderful, and how you captivate those.
Mm.
But when you think about it, what about the real stability in here?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
he might not be stable.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure what if what you mean by he might not be stable is,
Might
maybe some
not be
chemical
stable.
balance.
Yeah, because again, when I'm talking about dealing with reality,
Okay.
he's able to mimic what he's
Mm.
seeing, because all those things are just things that he's noticing that part, but he's not noticing what he's supposed to be doing.
Right. 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 Right.
So
Yeah. I
he
mean,
can pass the stability test, but not be stable.
absolutely. Absolutely. And if I'm getting you correctly, especially when you say he can pass the stability test. So first and foremost, it's not necessarily a pass or test, but
I know what I don't mean it
right,
like that, but I just
right,
want to say, yeah,
right. I just wanted to clarify it for the audience,
yeah,
but I um, but there is a lot of, like, one thing that we have learned to do very well is that we have learned to have reflexive moves that allow us to protect ourselves in the
yes,
ways that actually have a cost that we aren't seeing, right? And this happens a lot with high performing men. And by high performing, I mean someone who has learned enough of the social skills that they are now, they operate in, the high areas, but they're also managing in a way that is also limiting, right? And so you'll have a person who has learned, to do certain things that got them to where they are in the corporate world, for example, or wherever they are, but they've also learned the cost of being their full selves sometimes doesn't get them the outcome that they're looking for. And so as a result, they're managing in they're playing politics. A lot of times you'll hear that, especially amongst Black men. It's like, well, I'm aware that I'm a Black man and how I'm being perceived and this, that, and the third. And this is not to say that this is untrue, because a lot of it, if not most of it, is true. The question then is, are you in the right room? And so a lot of the times, right, because of financial pressures, maybe, you know what, you have to be mindful that, you know what, I may not be in the right room, but I have to pay these bills, right? And so for me, first you have to start early. When you don't have, like, if I don't have a wife and kids, and I can start being myself much earlier, so that I'm finding the right rooms. I am fully showing up as myself, and then the people who are accepting of that, those are the people that I go with. Now, if you're not in that situation, you do have a wife and kids, you have bills to pay. My perspective is very similar to being an entrepreneur who has a 9-to-5. What you're doing ultimately is you are making sure you have something that's paying the bills and looking to be your full self otherwise. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an entrepreneurship, but perhaps it's like going into an area or applying for a job where you can fully be yourself. So I don't advocate that we just blow everything up, but the truth is that you cannot be your best self if you're not your full self. Like this, it's going to have a ceiling, because if you're constantly managing and not necessarily being who you truly are, you're not going to reach your potential. And I want to say this too before I finish that, because ultimately there is a difference between, because like there is a there is a thing, there isn't necessarily a clear line between authenticity and, you know, your ideal self, right? And what I mean by that is, you know, a lot of times people feel like they're not enough, right? When
Yes.
like they're feeling like the way that they're behaving, there are other people who are behaving in a way that, like, they'll show up into the room and they'll say like, I'm not enough. And the truth is that 9 times out of 10, unless, like you were saying, like these people are chemically imbalanced or they never had any real social skills, you are enough. It's what you are, the way you are is completely enough. But that doesn't negate the fact that you are not perfect. And the perfection needs to continuously be pursued. There's two different things, and we are confusing the two. When you know, for example, okay, I am enough, but I could have, you know, articulated this a little bit differently. I could have understood, for example, that relational skills required that I validated this person's thought as opposed to immediately differing from it. Right. And so we're going to say, well, it's politics. No, that's not politics. That's interrelational skills. If you go in and you just disagree with somebody, they're going to feel a certain way about that. And so those are skills to be learned. And so if you're continuously learning that, that doesn't mean you're not authentic because you feel like I should just be able to say you're wrong. That's not the case. And so I think we need to understand that you are enough, but that doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't continuously be learning.
So I want to ask you this question about this. You were talking about the high performers.
Mhm.
You know, as I was thinking about, as you were putting that in context, I'm thinking that those are the people, those men are the ones that are egomaniacs and narcissists.
Okay.
That's why they feel like they're high performers, but they're less in value. And so what that means is that these are the people that get that dominance complex that you mentioned earlier, because they have to be in control of all of those situations. And so what you have to understand is not everything is catered and targeted towards you. So how do you get men to actually see that as calling themselves high performers when most likely they're not?
Okay, let me make sure I understand what you're saying before I respond to something that's not actually what you're saying. So these guys think they're high performers, but they're not high performers. Is that what you mean?
No, and those are the ones that are egomaniacs and narcissists because they have to control the situation because they're saying they're high performers.
Okay. Okay. They're saying they're saying they're high performers, and as a result, they have to control the situation. and that may, backfire, for example. Right. Okay. So I would say that I mean, there a multitude of different ways that high performers and low performers behave, but I do agree that there is a group of folks who, um, because they see themselves as high performers, it's harder for them to see where they are lacking. Right, a lot of it seems to be working. They're looking at, for example, their salary and saying, well, that's working. They're looking at, some of their possessions. Well, that's working. But they don't realize that there is, a cost to some of the things that they're not doing, or as you're saying, some of the things that they are doing, like having to try to maintain control over a particular situation. Um, they need for things to happen in a certain way. A lot of times, whether it, especially when it's folks that they have a level of control over, right? So if it is, a lot of times it's the family members, right? And so um, if they're performing well, potentially at work, and the wife or the kids are not getting the kind of attention that they need, for example, they're unwilling to see that, or they're not ready to see those sorts of things as issues. And so it's difficult to get people to see that, unless, of course, and this is part of what I do, unless, of course, well, unless they are willing to see that the issue that keeps the pattern, the repeated, um, arguments, unless they're willing to see that they play a role in that, you know, and unless, and part of what it is that I do is that I try to unearth the internal issues that are taking place when they when they might have an argument that gets triggered, and that may be one of the things that highlights, okay, well, clearly you're triggered by this. Why is this something that's so problematic for you? And so that may be the start of changing um their viewpoint.
So I got two comments here from Nikki. I'll put the first one up.
Yeah, right.
And the question is asked, do you think the shift changed after Vietnam War?
Mm,
And the second here is not enough. That's so true.
not enough. I'm not sure what the not enough that's so true is referring to, but
No,
I get a
when
sense
you
of
were saying when you were saying that some people think that they're not enough when they come into
that.
the rooms.
Yes, 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 yes. That is, like, I'm gonna quickly address that because that's something that I both learn, but I also try to communicate to my children, because in their head it's like, they think that these individuals who are where they think they should be have, their behaviors and their personalities, or what they have learned throughout their lives, is somehow so much different that they now have to have accumulated all of that before they can be like, I'm enough to be here. And it's completely
Yes.
untrue. It's like, no, your experience is completely good enough, and you just got to come in and be okay with who you are, and talk, and be, right. And so you know I think part of the reason that it's confusing is because they may see a situation where it's like, I did not behave ideally, or I could have done this better, and then they assume, well, that's clearly evidence that I'm not enough. And so that's why I say there's a difference between being enough and wanting to continue to improve, pursuing the perfection that you'll never have. That's something that you should continue to do. And so there's a different, like, understand you're enough, but continue to get better. um and then, so the Vietnam War as a shift, that's a great question. I don't know. There are people who actually do research on the numbers and factors. I forget the name of the guy. I have to go back. A podcast that I watch is Modern Wisdom. I forget the guy's name. Chris something. Modern Wisdom. And he focuses a lot on the folks who do this. There was a particular episode where there were some guys who were looking at the numbers where it started to shift. And so I don't know if that's like I can look that up and send it to you, Charles, and see whether or not
Yes.
that could come out. But I don't have the specific numbers, but there are people who are looking at those numbers more specifically.
Um, let's move over to why men withdraw and they're not broken, and it's they're being undertrained.
Mm-hmm.
You work specifically with withdrawal patterns in Black men. Walk us through what you see most often, the ways Black men disappear, not physically, but emotionally, relationally, and psychologically.
Yeah. I think again, and it's starting to happen earlier and earlier, but I think initially, like when you're a boy, and everyone is telling you that you should be King Arthur, you know, and you're like, okay, well, yeah, that is possible. I can be King Arthur. And then you believe that, and then you start to you might compete with somebody else who is better than you. And so now it's like, wait, am I supposed to be King Arthur? Maybe not. Okay, I don't that this experience wasn't great. Maybe you responded in a way that showed the emotion, and your mom and or dad was like, come on, bro, suck it up. And so now it's like, okay, I can't even do that anymore. So now this is when the withdrawal starts. I'm not going to put myself in a position where I now lose. Why would I do that? I'm not going to put myself in a position where the girls look at me and be like, and whatever the case may be. Like, why would I do that? And this is why they stop showing up. And for older men, we have, especially those who are quote unquote like high performing, those who have gone to college and that sort of thing. Sometimes, not sometimes, so many of us, and this is part of the reason why the student debt situation is so high in the Black community. What they fed us was, because we didn't have family and network who could just pay for our colleges. They were just like, okay, here, take this loan, take this loan, take this loan. And we're like, okay, well, you're telling us this is what we need to do to become successful. Let me take this loan. And so a lot of times the income that was promised wasn't realized. Many times, perhaps we didn't get the jobs for multiple reasons, some of which, like we've already known, is racial. Like you'll send a resume with a name that's Black sounding, and that very same resume is not going to get as many yeses as the one with a white sounding name. And so there's many things that have happened ultimately that have led to us saying, okay, maybe this is not for me. Maybe this dream that I had, maybe it's not possible for me. And this is where the withdrawal starts. And so this is the pattern that I'm noticing, and this is the thing that we have to combat. Again, because whether or not these patterns are true, you're going to live on this earth. And so what is, again, from the warrior's perspective, what is the benefit of giving up? What have you earned from it? You still have to live. What's like the idea of saying, okay, well, I'm not going to try anymore, only is a result of you not wanting to get hurt. That's an internal stability thing. Like, because it doesn't actually really matter whether or not these things are happening. You got to continue to pursue what your dreams are. And so there's no benefit other than, what, I don't want to get hurt. And that's a mental thing. Like you don't have to see that as any sense of what your true value is.
So we're actually here almost at the brink of our crust in time. I would love to have you back on the show to conclude this conversation, because all of the things that we're talking about at this point, I want to tell you that I think anybody that has not gotten the opportunity to not only check out your website, but understand your system, I think it's something that we all need to take a look at, especially as Black men. because it definitely makes an enormous amount of sense, and I like what it does and what it has the ability to do.
Appreciate that.
Um, so if you, as we're coming here towards the end, can you are there any words of wisdom and encouragement you'd like to leave for our audience? Tell them how to connect with you via social media, go to your website, all of the good things that you've got going on there.
Again, Charles, I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this. It's something that is a mission of mine, and I'm glad that I've always been interested in helping our people out. That's just my nature. I'm like I'm part of a team, family, whatever it is, and my thing is to contribute. I in college I was big into Afrocentricity, and so there is a lot that I have learned with respect to how to help our people, and how I personally feel like, fear, internal instability has, robbed me of what I know that I was capable of. And so my purpose now is to make sure that doesn't continue to happen, to people. My purpose now is to live my true self and help others to do the same. And my word of wisdom for everyone is that this is precisely what it is that you need ultimately to be your best self. Like a lot of times people struggle with what their calling is. And I think part of the reason that that happens is because they have found something that is of interest to them, that's something that could in fact be their calling, but because someone does it better, or because they didn't do the thing well enough, because they haven't honed it, or the person who does it better is either someone who has been honing it longer than them, or someone who may be naturally talented at it but may not necessarily be as interested and would not necessarily hone it as you would. Because of that caused an internal stability pressure that made them say, maybe this is not for me. And when you do that, you have now limited your ability to actually do what your true calling is. And so for me, internal stability is so big in terms of getting us to where we need, when we truly believe, right? When we truly believe that this is something that we are capable of doing, when we don't let internal stability make us doubt that, then is when we can actually go in and start doing the things that are necessary to actually achieve it. So that's what I want to leave the audience with.
So, do you want to give them your social media handles?
Social media handle, as you can see here, if you can see, it's 11 kilometers per second, 11 km, the letter K, the letter M, per per second. That is the speed at which something must move in order to escape Earth's gravity. It's the escape velocity. So I use it as a metaphor for the things that we must do to escape the things that hold us down and not letting us soar into the heavens. So that's also my website, 11kilometerspersecond.com. And there you can take the snapshot and reach out to me on social media. And, I'm always willing to have a conversation.
I want to thank you for doing this wonderful show. And again, like I said, we definitely have to have you back because, your system is one that is more than just thought provocative. It actually helps to put some things here where, you have to make this thing move a little bit. So I appreciate that because, knowing is half the battle. And so we just have to spend the time and we have to make it work. And so I'm gonna close with this monologue. And in the process of closing, can you stick around for a few minutes after I close the show?
Absolutely. And I welcome the opportunity to come back and speak anytime.
Well, I want you guys to sit here for just a moment before I say anything else. Because what just happened, this conversation is not something that happens often enough in public spaces. We do not often make room on a platform in front of an audience on a Sunday afternoon for Black men to be discussed, not as a problem to be solved, not as a statistic to be debated, not as a risk to be managed, but as human beings with an interior life that deserves language, deserves attention, deserves a framework that is built specifically for them. We made that room today, and I want to acknowledge it before we move on. Mackens Audena walked into this conversation with something that took courage to build. Because it is one thing to recognize a gap, it is another thing entirely to name it, study it, create a framework around it, and then bring it back to the very community you came from and say, built this for you. The relational power framework was not born in a vacuum. It was born in observation. It was born in honesty. It was born in the willingness of a man who achieved everything the world said would make him whole and ask out loud why it still wasn't enough. That kind of intellectual courage, that kind of cultural love, it is rare. And we do not take it lightly. Mackens, on behalf of every man and woman who needed this conversation today, thank you. Thank you for the work. Thank you for the language. Thank you for the framework. Thank you for being here. And now I want to speak directly to the Black men. You sitting in the car, at the desk, on the couch, in the barbershop, in the break room, with earbuds in. I want to talk to you, not to diagnose you, not to fix you, not to perform concern for you. I want to tell you something true. You are not broken. You were handed a model about what strength looks like, about what a man is, about what you are allowed to need, and you ran with it because that is what men do. You ran with what you were given, but running with an incomplete toolkit for 20, 30, 40 years has a cost. And you know that cost. You felt it, maybe in your relationships, maybe in your body, maybe in the quiet that falls in rooms where it shouldn't be quiet. The invitation today, and it is only an invitation, is to consider that there is more. That the work of becoming a relational leader, of building internal stability, of moving from undertaken to trained, that work is not weakness. That work is the most powerful thing you will ever do. Not for the world, for yourself first. And then, yes, the ripple goes everywhere. This is why CKStories from the Heart exist. Not to be another talk show, not to fill the airtime on a Sunday, but to hold the stories, the real ones, the hard ones, the ones that have been buried under titles and credentials and silence and survival, and to say, these stories matter. You matter, and the conversation is not over. It is just the beginning. To our audience, thank you for being here. Thank you for trusting this space with your Sunday. Subscribe, share this episode with every person in your life who has a Black man they love, who is a Black man they are trying to understand, who is a Black man trying to understand himself. Find Mackens Audena and his platform, 11 kilometers per second. The links are in the description on the YouTube channels. And come back next Sunday, because CKStories from the Heart, the conversation never stops. It only gets deeper. I'm your host, Charles Zachary King from the Heart. I'll see you guys next week, and peace.